Good morning, PT on Ice. How's everybody doing? Happy Monday. Let me just get this adjusted here so we can see what's going on. I am in the mobile studio this morning on Monday, the end of April. I have a meeting I'm getting ready to walk into, so need to do this from the mobile studio again today. Hopefully the sound is coming through and y'all can hear me. So I'm going to go ahead and get rolling. Looks like we got some people rolling in. Good morning. Good morning. Hey, Carly. Hey, TJ. Hope you guys are doing well. So let me hit the timer and get started here. All right. So this morning I wanted to kind of touch on a topic that I've been exploring a little bit lately. And I don't think I'm going to do it justice to be right off the bat and just kind of start with some level of candor and honesty. This is just me kind of putting a toe in the water, but I think it's a really important topic, and I think it's one that we all need to explore a little bit. And so the topic of Into the Darkness kind of hopefully will make some sense as I get going. So, you know, what I've been watching and kind of seeing, and if you really read the literature on pain and kind of the incidence of pain and sort of this pain conundrum that we have, what we've really seen is this idea of despair. And I've touched on it before, and I've kind of touched on the biological mechanisms a little bit and talked about chronic allostasis and just this concept of like a body and a mind that's breaking down. And so a lot of different things have been sort of happening and swirling lately that pushed me to kind of look a little deeper. So first, some context. One, I gave a presentation recently to a really big group of executives and HR representatives and just people who are kind of in this space that I tend to be in. And what it really was, it was sort of a dive on, you know, pain, and they were really talking about the opioid crisis, and that's the meeting I'm about to walk into this morning is kind of talking about the same stuff. You know, businesses are really wrestling with this. They're really having a hard time with it, and they're trying to get their minds wrapped around it. And so many times what happens is the resources tend to be sort of geared toward, you know, how do you deal with it better? When a person shows up with an addiction, what do you do? What are the services that are necessary? And of course, my angle and the angle I try to really get people thinking about is, well, if we're talking about, you know, an addiction crisis, we've got to back that up and get upstream to it to the point where we start to really understand what we're trying to get after. And what we're really trying to do is get our brains wrapped around pain overall and kind of the expression of that pain. And if you look at sort of the literature beyond kind of the detailed, you know, little itsy bitsy pieces of pain that we all tend to spend our lives talking about and get into the bigger picture of pain, you often hear this term of despair come up. And so I've been sort of, you know, looking at that and trying to find that. And I've talked about the fact that we have a subjective well-being crisis. And I often try to hammer that. The idea that what we really have here is not necessarily a pain medication problem. What we have is a pain problem. We have people who are, you know, sort of the physical manifestation of a lack of subjective well-being, also known as people are not happy. And because of that, they are experiencing a higher level of pain. Now, the thing that's kind of gotten me is that conversation has been happening and swirling for a while. And yet there's this other conversation that kind of keeps coming up, and one that hats off to Alan. He has sort of forced me down this road a little bit, and that is sort of the escapism associated with pain, right? The fact that most people don't want to be in pain, and so they try to find ways out of it. And that one of those ways, for example, might be opioids. One of those ways might be other types of addictions. Some of those things might be positive addictions, like they exercise. Some of those things might be negative addictions, like they drink too much. But the bottom line is that there's this sort of like thought, or at least this theory, this mind kind of thread that says, you know, people are despairing more than ever. And because of that, they're trying to find ways out of that. They're trying to kind of get away from that sensation, which we can't blame people. And so I started to dive into this a little bit. I found one study that recently came out, and it was a huge observational study. I think it was done on like 1 million people in France. And what they wanted to look at was dementia. And what they found was that the single greatest predictor associated with early onset dementia was alcohol usage. And what they talked about was for men, that was more than 4 drinks a day. And for women, it was 3 drinks a day or more. And so that's a number that seemed to bring on biological change. So I wasn't satisfied with that, and I'll find that if anybody's interested and you want to see it, but pretty conclusive, right? Like, without a doubt, made me stop and think and say, man, like, thankfully I don't, I don't think I'm at that risk category, but maybe I should be finding ways to say, hey, I'm going to save my one beer for the weekend, or I'm going to have a couple of beers during the weekend, and that's going to be it. So that's one thing that without a doubt I've had to sort of, take in stride. I mean, it's no different in my mind than the day that I realized that, that highly processed meat was not a really good thing for my body, and I said, all right, we got to get away from that. But that's a very logical approach. I wanted to go a little deeper and say, well, what's beyond that? And what I found was a really cool mathematical equation. I'm not sure everyone has seen this before. And this was sort of the mathematical definition of despair, and it was originally talked about by Viktor Frankl, which, if you don't know who Viktor Frankl is, I would say learn. I mean, there's no way I'm going to do it justice in sort of talking about this, but just understand this guy is a physician, psychiatrist, neurologist, who also experienced firsthand what it was like to be in some of the most, unimaginable conditions possible, spent some time in Auschwitz, and was a survivor. And he wrote a very famous book called Man's Search for Meaning, and really kind of dove into this idea of despair. And what he tried to do is put a mathematical term on it. And what he said was that despair is suffering minus meaning. I want to let that settle in a little bit. Despair is suffering minus meaning. So meaning that if you have an increase in suffering or a decrease in meaning, you will get an increase in despair. And one of the things that kind of like he dove into was almost this paradoxical idea of sort of embracing it and kind of going after it and challenging it back instead of running from it and being afraid of the situation. And I thought there were some parallels there. We often talk about the idea that pain is something that is very intimately tied to fear. And he, sort of in his observation said there were some things that had to happen. One of them was sort of like embracing the fact that in any given day it could be your last day. Like you could be dead tomorrow, and you just had to kind of be okay with that. And at the minute you were okay with that, you sort of freed yourself from the fear of it and were able to live. And I thought that was just really, really profound. And that's kind of like the genesis of this idea. This idea of kind of going into the darkness, that every one of us is faced in our lives with all sorts of ugly, dark areas, and pain. The people that we're seeing who are in pain, who often present to us, that may be the physical manifestation of a lot of darkness in their life. And that many times we're sort of prompted to want to run away from it, to kind of get away from it. And one of the things, and you can find a video clip of Viktor Frankl talking about this, and I mean, it had to be pretty old because I think he died in like 1997 or something. So well before this whole idea of diseases of despair even kind of became a thing, seemed a little prescient, I guess. If you go back and you watch this video, he's being interviewed, and he basically says, like, we have to kind of understand that that meaning is freedom. That freedom may be at the root of this whole thing. That when you have meaning, when you can find meaning in a situation, regardless of the environment you're in, and I know this goes a little counterintuitive to a lot of what we talk about, where people are sort of the product of their environment. So this guy who has experienced, I mean, quite arguably the worst potential imaginable. I can't think of much worse than the descriptions of Auschwitz, right? So this guy is experiencing this firsthand and saying, no, like, that's not true. Like those of us who survived, those of us who got to the other side, the few, were the ones who found meaning even in that level of despair. And it was the ones who didn't do that, unfortunately, the ones who tried to think about the future, the ones who didn't stay in the moment and just kind of say, look, we're going to get through today, the ones who didn't kind of trudge through, that actually did worse. I really think there's something there. And I know, like, I'm not bringing a lot of really well thought out things here, but I'm trying to give it to you as it's coming in, right? For me, like, I've spent most of this weekend kind of thinking about that and trying to sort of chew on that a little bit, because I think that's really what we're dealing with. I think that when we talk to a person, we meet a person who is hurting, I think we have to ask ourselves, like, are they hurting more than at just the surface? Are they hurting more than at just the moving parts? Chances are good that they are. I mean, it doesn't take much to think about the fact that this pain crisis has been sort of connected back to economic depression of 2009, and that we may be seeing the fallout of some of the hardest stressors that any of our society has ever seen during that time. It doesn't take much to understand that people in sort of a generation that are graduating college are going to be saddled with the antithesis of freedom. Right? I mean, people who have debt, people who have financial stress, we know that financial stress plays into poorer well-being. Why is that? Because you have the lack of freedom, like total slavery to that debt. And we know that the conditions, whether they be environmental, like physical environment, or psychosocial environment that you might find yourself in, absolutely tethers you to a life that kind of doesn't have as much meaning or can't have as much meaning. And that unless we can find that, we're going to experience some level of hopelessness and some level of despair. And so there's a lot there, and it's a lot to unpack. And I guess the thing that I'm hoping to kind of get us thinking about, and if we're really worried about, or I shouldn't say worried, but if we're really concerned, if we really want to see the health of the population move in the right direction, we have to know the depths of what we're fighting. We have to understand how dark and gloomy it can be. And that really very much might be us going into those dark spaces, spending a little bit of time, and then hopefully being able to pull back out of it. Now, I know in my world, I sort of am a believer that you go into those spaces with a lifeline. Like, you don't go in by yourself all alone, because it'll suck you right in and like you just become the next one. But that you pull yourself back out, you touch base with your crew and your home base, and then you can go back in and fight another day, right? So that's the essence, and you've heard me say this, of why we call base camp, because you go there, you go back there, you climb the mountain every day, you come back home, right? Like, there's a safe space for you. But no less, we have to understand that that's really where we're going. And that when we can liberate ourselves enough somehow to have that conversation with people, to really understand why they are hurting, what is it about you, that's like, what are the factors, are you suffering like an inordinate amount, right? If so, we've got to get you out of that environment. So yes, there definitely are build a better environment, create better communities, invest in those kinds of things. That's decrease the S. On the other side, I think we've kind of forgotten the fact that we could be looking to increase the M. Are we talking to people about like what are they trying to accomplish in life? Like, what is their meaning? Why do they exist? Like, what is it that they're trying to do? And then how can we help them do that? Some of those things may have nothing to do with treatment. They might have everything to do with just kind of finding them a resource or making them a connection. And that may be a very much a therapeutic outcome. I think the main take home is that if we can start there, if we can get that idea that, look, many of the manifestations of pain that we are seeing, much of the physical well-being, like lack thereof that we are trying to deal with, is rooted in despair. It has its roots in people who just are feeling hopeless, like that the world is burning them out. And we all feel it. There's no doubt about it. I mean, if you are in the health professions and you feel like, the world is caving in on you, if you don't feel that way, I would think you're the exception, not the rule. And so the question becomes, how do we band together and create situations where we can help people find meaning? Or we can lower the suffering overall, build environments where there's not as much suffering. And I think we've got a lot of lessons to learn there. So I'll just sort of wrap it up. I mean, I have 2 minutes left here on the clock, but I think what I want to do is just kind of get us thinking. I wanted to poke that bear a little bit, and I think for me, this is the essence of Indore. Right? This is why Indore is an element, right? This is why we look at it as, it's about learning how to go there and be okay, survive, and come back out. Because if we can learn that personally, then we can help other people learn that as well. We can pass that on. And I think sometimes we forget about that. We forget about the fact that this journey for us is a journey of understanding what it means to endure. And though we would never want someone to experience firsthand like what it means to be, in persistent pain or to have a chronic addiction or something no, don't test that theory. But I do think we need to test the theory of darkness and be able to go in and then come back out again. And that's scary. It's a scary prospect. But I think if we're truly going to be empathic, if we're truly going to understand the problems that people are facing, then we have to somehow put ourselves in that scenario. I don't know how everyone can put ourselves in the scenario in our own lives. I mean, we all have different ways of doing it. But I think that's the essence of Endure. It's go there, Be there, experience it, and then live to tell the tale. Get on the other side of it. Push through. Decrease suffering, increase meaning. Obliterate despair. The minute we do that, I think we'll actually make some inroads. So I'm about to walk in the door. Like I said, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to talk to an executive vice president and his staff. And I'm going to spend some time explaining to them exactly how big of a problem this is for their folks. And then what folks like us can do about it. And I think the thing that we really have to understand is one of the first things that we can do about it is connect with people and have some life experience of what it means to endure. And in the minute that we do that is the minute that we can make a difference. I hope that made some sense. I know it probably didn't. These are just thoughts that are formulating. But I encourage you to sort of chime back, give some dialogue. I mean, some of the latest things I've seen on Twitter recently have really, really made me question whether or not we are willing to get in there and actually endure, or if we're just going to run from it. I guess they say there are some people who run from things and there are other people that run toward things. I think we should be the ones who run toward things. I guess that's it. All right, it's Monday. It's going to be a good week. Things in New Jersey at least are starting to bloom. There's actually some colors. Spring is here. It's pretty good. I even got some fertilizer down this weekend. Have a great Monday. It's only Monday. Make it count.